It began with a sound no one expected to hear, the quiet scrape of chairs. One by one, polished heels clicked against the marble floor as women in power suits gathered their things. The air in the room shifted. Meghan Markle stood at the podium, her voice steady at first, her posture regal. But the sound, that subtle, humiliating rhythm of people leaving, broke something in the air. Imagine that. You've built your image around being heard, adored, watched. And suddenly, the audience is walking out mid-sentence. Was this a misunderstanding? Or had the room finally grown tired of Meghan's story? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's a question that rippled far beyond the four walls of that Washington ballroom. Because this wasn't just any stage. This was the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit, a gathering where influence is currency and authenticity is the language of leadership. For years, Meghan Markle had chased that kind of validation, from Hollywood lights to Buckingham Palace, and then to Silicon Valley panels and glossy magazine covers. Every appearance was crafted to prove something, to reclaim something, to rewrite her narrative. But that night, as the cameras rolled and the seats emptied, it wasn't the validation she got, it was the reality she had spent years trying to outrun. The irony? The summit was supposed to be her moment of redemption. After months of being mocked for her fading relevance, this was her chance to show she could still command the spotlight. The audience included CEOs, activists, journalists, and influencers, the kind of women Meghan once hoped would see her as an equal, maybe even as an icon. But instead, what they saw left them unimpressed, detached, some even irritated. And when the first guest quietly stood up and made her way to the door, others followed like dominoes. Social media would later explode with clips, hashtags, and split-screen analyses. One headline read, "Empty seats. Meghan's fortune moment turns sour." Another described it bluntly, "She lost the room." But what really happened that night? Why did a speech about women's empowerment, Meghan's favorite theme, trigger such an exodus? Was it her tone? Her words? Or something deeper, something the cameras couldn't quite capture? Let's rewind a little. In the days leading up to the event, Meghan's PR team was buzzing. They pitched this appearance as her new chapter. Gone was the royal victim narrative. This would be Meghan the visionary, Meghan the humanitarian, Meghan the voice of modern female leadership. Leaks from her camp described a personal, heartfelt talk, something meant to inspire connection. Yet behind closed doors, insiders whispered about tension. There were reports that Fortune executives had grown uneasy with how Meghan's team was micromanaging every detail, from seating arrangements to the wording of her introduction. Some staffers even joked, "It feels more like a coronation than a conversation." Still, when Meghan arrived, cameras flashed. She wore her signature neutral tones, her hair perfectly glossy, her smile unshakable. To the audience, it looked like confidence. To those who knew her patterns, it looked like performance. Because beneath that calm exterior, there was one thing Meghan couldn't control, the reaction of the room. When she finally took the stage, her first few lines seemed rehearsed, too polished, too calculated. As women, we must not just take up space, but redefine what that space looks like, she began. It sounded powerful on paper, but in that moment, it landed with a thud. The words hung heavy, lifeless, not because they lacked meaning, but because they lacked sincerity. Here's the contradiction no one talks about. Meghan speaks of empowerment, but often from a pedestal, not from the trenches. Her audience that day wasn't the adoring fans of a Netflix documentary or the sympathetic ears of a podcast. These were women who had built empires, fought for seats in boardrooms, and earned respect the hard way. They could spot rehearsed empathy a mile away. And in Meghan's tone, they heard it. That subtle blend of self-promotion wrapped in inspiration. The first signs of trouble appeared around the midpoint of her speech. Some guests glanced at their phones, others whispered quietly. One attendee reportedly rolled her eyes after Meghan repeated the word authenticity for the third time. The energy was slipping. Meghan didn't notice it at first. She was too focused on the teleprompter, on the rhythm of her own delivery. But then, a shuffle in the second row caught her eye. A woman, a well-known tech executive, gathered her notepad, stood up, and walked toward the exit. Meghan paused for half a second. Then she forced a smile and continued. That pause told a story. Behind the smile was confusion, maybe a flicker of panic. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not to her. The next few minutes felt longer than they were. Another attendee stood up, then two more. The exits became a quiet parade. Meghan's voice grew slightly higher, her gesture sharper. You could almost feel her trying to win them back, to reassert control over a situation slipping away in real time. And yet, the more she spoke, the emptier the room became. Some claimed later that it wasn't about Meghan at all, that it was late, that people had flights to catch. But others weren't buying it. Because the timing, the body language, the lack of applause, all of it told a different story. Something in Meghan's message had missed the mark. Something had pushed people away. And when you've spent years building an image around being adored, that kind of rejection hits harder than any headline. Was it fatigue? The Meghan effect finally wearing off? The audience, once charmed by her outsider versus establishment narrative, now seeing it as rehearsed? Or was this moment a reflection of something bigger, the slow unraveling of the Meghan Markle brand itself? There's a saying in the entertainment world, the crowd never lies. And on that stage, in that glittering ballroom, the crowd had spoken, not with boos or heckles, but with silence and exit doors. Afterward, her team scrambled to manage the optics. The official Fortune account posted flattering clips, focusing on the first few minutes when the room was full. Meghan's team circulated photos cropped just right, showing her smiling confidently, the background blurred to hide the empty seats. But in the age of social media, reality doesn't stay hidden for long. Attendees began posting their own footage. TikTok videos captioned "awkward" spread like wildfire. Screenshots showing empty rows went viral. The comments were brutal. She lost her magic. Even the elites are done. How the mighty have fallen. But beyond the gossip and the headlines, this moment revealed something more profound. It exposed the fragility of Meghan's new identity. The activist, the speaker, the thought leader. For years, she thrived in spaces where she could control the narrative. But the Fortune Summit wasn't her stage. It was a shared one. And that made all the difference. The emotional undertone of the night wasn't just embarrassment, it was reckoning. Because this wasn't the British press twisting her words. This wasn't royal protocol limiting her voice. This was Meghan, on her own, standing before a crowd that chose not to listen. Think about that. What does it mean when power walks away from you? Not because you said the wrong thing, but because they no longer believe you mean what you say. As the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped, Meghan reportedly left through a side door. Witnesses said she looked tense, jaw clenched, avoiding eye contact. Her team moved quickly, whispering, shielding her from photographers. It was the end of a night that had started with such high expectations, a night meant to reintroduce Meghan Markle as a voice of influence, not controversy. Instead, it became another symbol of her disconnect. And yet, as damaging as it seemed, this was only the beginning. Because what came next, the backstage confrontation, the leaks, the viral backlash, would turn a humiliating evening into a full-blown PR crisis. But what really triggered that chain reaction? Who first leaked the footage? And why did insiders say Meghan's fury backstage was unlike anything they'd seen before? The truth behind those empty seats was about to spill, and once it did, there was no going back. It was supposed to be perfect. The lighting, the cameras, the energy, everything carefully designed to remind the world that Meghan Markle still mattered. The Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit wasn't just another event. It was the stage. The kind of platform that could relaunch a brand, rewrite a reputation, and reignite global fascination. For Meghan, this wasn't a speech, it was a statement. A declaration that she was back, still relevant, still powerful. But what happens when the performance you've choreographed to perfection begins to crumble before your eyes? The day began with the usual Markle precision. A convoy of sleek black cars pulled up to the Washington, D.C. venue, tinted windows glinting beneath the morning light. Security teams flanked the entrance. Meghan emerged, draped in a cream-colored ensemble that screamed understated royalty, confident, camera-ready, every strand of hair in place. She flashed that familiar smile, the one she'd perfected, equal parts warmth and control. Paparazzi lenses clicked like machine guns. Attendees whispered, some in admiration, others in thinly veiled curiosity. For months, Meghan had stayed relatively quiet, strategically stepping back from the spotlight after public fatigue began to creep in. But this was meant to be her grand re-entry. Inside, the stage was set to dazzle. The fortune banner stretched elegantly across the backdrop. Rows of power players filled the ballroom. CEOs from billion-dollar companies, media moguls, tech innovators, and activists. The audience wasn't just influential, it was the elite of the elite. Meghan's kind of crowd. The kind she'd spent years trying to belong to. Every detail had been carefully arranged. The lighting, soft but empowering. The seating, structured to make the room look full, especially in front of the cameras. Even her introduction had been vetted line by her team. They wanted no surprises, no improvisation. Meghan's image had to stay immaculate. The irony? That kind of control kills spontaneity. And authenticity, the very thing this audience values most, can't be choreographed. When her name was announced, the applause started strong. Cameras zoomed in, and the room seemed alive with anticipation. Meghan stepped onto the stage, chin lifted, shoulders squared. The spotlight bathed her in gold. She paused, just for effect. The first few seconds were pure Hollywood. Calculated, cinematic, perfect. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice smooth and measured. "It's an honor to be here among so many women who redefine power every single day." It was the kind of line designed for applause. But what she got instead was polite clapping, brief, lukewarm, obligatory. The kind that says, "We're listening, but don't waste our time." Still, Meghan pressed on. Her opening story was personal, about resilience, about finding her voice after being silenced. The audience nodded at first, perhaps out of courtesy, but something was missing. That spark, that connection. The words felt rehearsed, almost mechanical. She talked about lifting women up, breaking barriers, owning your narrative. Phrases that once inspired now sounded recycled, hollow. Maybe they'd heard it too many times. Maybe they were tired of the royal drama that always trailed behind her like a storm cloud. Or maybe they could sense what the cameras couldn't hide, that this speech wasn't coming from the heart. Because here's the contradiction that hung heavy in the air. Meghan wanted to talk about empowerment, but every move she made screamed control. Her tone was polished to perfection, but her eyes revealed tension. Each line seemed memorized rather than lived. In the front rows, a few notable figures exchanged glances. Some tapped their pens, others checked their watches. The initial excitement dimmed. And then it started. One woman, a senior executive from a major media company, quietly stood up. She gathered her bag, smiled politely, and made her way toward the exit. A few heads turned. Meghan noticed. For a second, her rhythm faltered. Her hand tightened around the microphone. She blinked, regained her composure, and kept going. But the energy had shifted. When another attendee followed, then two more, the illusion of control began to slip. The room felt heavier, quieter, awkward. To anyone watching from home, it might have looked minor. A few people leaving, no big deal. But in that kind of environment, perception is everything. One person walking out sends a message. 3 people walking out sends a headline. Some whispered later that the content of Meghan's speech was the problem. Too much self-focus. Too little humility. One guest was overheard saying, "It felt more like a memoir pitch than motivation." Others believed it was her tone, the subtle air of superiority that has haunted Meghan since her royal days. She wasn't speaking to the audience. She was speaking at them. But maybe, just maybe, the issue ran deeper. Because for all her talk about authenticity, vulnerability, and connection, Meghan seemed trapped in her own narrative, unable to escape the performance of being Meghan Markle. And the people in that room, women who had built their success on grit, not glamour, could see it. Backstage, her team was already sensing the shift. Assistants exchanged nervous glances, PR handlers whispered into phones. Something was off, and they could feel it. The energy that was supposed to lift Meghan had turned against her. By the end of her speech, the applause was scattered. No standing ovation. No thunderous cheers. Just polite clapping, a few forced smiles, and an undercurrent of discomfort that everyone could feel, but no one wanted to name. For Meghan, that silence was louder than any headline. Afterward, as she exited the stage, witnesses said she maintained her composure, smile intact, posture perfect. But once she stepped behind the curtain, her expression changed. The charm melted away, replaced by something rawer. A mix of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. Her staff swarmed, offering reassurances. "You were brilliant," one said. "They loved it," another added. But Meghan wasn't buying it. She'd felt it. That sinking feeling when the audience you're trying to impress has already made up their mind. And that's when the tension truly began to build. Because as Meghan tried to process what went wrong, whispers were already spreading outside. A few attendees posted cryptic comments online. "Interesting atmosphere. Unexpected reactions. Not quite the vibe we expected." The story was beginning to leak. Not yet full-blown scandal, but enough to make her uneasy. Enough to remind her that control, no matter how tightly held, can slip through your fingers when the truth walks out the door. Still, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe fatigue. Maybe bad timing. Maybe people just didn't get it. But Meghan was about to learn that this wasn't a minor misstep. This was the first crack in what she believed was her flawless comeback. Because in just a few hours, that quiet discomfort in the room would evolve into something far bigger: headlines, viral clips, and a PR nightmare her team couldn't spin away. And the first sign of that storm? It came the moment she realized who exactly had stood up first. The person who triggered that slow, humiliating walkout wasn't just anyone. It was someone Meghan desperately needed on her side. Someone powerful enough to make a room follow her lead. But who was she? And why did she leave? What happened next would not only expose Meghan's insecurities, it would ignite the kind of fallout that no publicist could contain. It started subtly, the kind of shift that most people wouldn't notice until it's too late. A flicker of discomfort here, a distracted glance there. But for those who know how to read a room, it was unmistakable. The energy had cracked. The air that had once hummed with expectation now hung thick with unease. And then, like a single domino in a line waiting to fall, one woman stood up. Her name wasn't shouted, but everyone recognized her face. A high-profile executive, one of the summit's keynote panelists, known for her boldness and quiet influence. She didn't make a scene. She didn't have to. She simply closed her notebook, lifted her designer tote, and began walking toward the exit. No hesitation. No backward glance. The room noticed. Meghan noticed. Imagine being on stage, halfway through a speech you've spent weeks perfecting, and seeing someone with that kind of power stand up and walk away. Every instinct tells you to ignore it, to keep going. But your eyes follow them anyway. Your voice wavers for half a beat. The confidence you rehearsed suddenly feels fragile. That's exactly what happened. Meghan's rhythm faltered. Just slightly, but enough for those watching closely to sense it. Her hand brushed her hair, her smile tightened. Then she powered on, as if nothing happened. But within minutes, another woman stood up. Then another. This time, the shuffle of footsteps was audible. Chairs creaked, handbags rustled, heels clicked against the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it was devastating. In a room filled with media-savvy executives, silence speaks volumes. Every exit was a statement. Every step away from the stage was a rejection of the message being sold. And yet Meghan kept going, her tone growing more emphatic, more desperate even. "When women support women," she said, "we create change that can't be silenced." But the irony cut deep, because in that moment, women were walking away, silencing her not with words, but with indifference. Cameras captured everything. The stage lights glared too brightly to hide the emptying rows. The footage later posted online showed a slow but steady trickle of exits. Not a stampede, worse. A quiet, dignified protest. Backstage, event coordinators exchanged nervous looks. Fortune staff whispered into headsets. "Do we cut the live feed?" someone muttered. "Keep rolling," another said. "We can't make it look worse." Meanwhile, Meghan's PR team, seated toward the back, was in full alert mode. Phones buzzed. Texts fired off. One assistant whispered, "She's losing them." Another replied, "Stay calm. She'll recover." But the truth? She couldn't. The speech that had been designed to inspire was unraveling before her eyes. Her once certain tone turned strained, her gestures sharper, her smile mechanical. It was as if she was talking at the audience, not to them. Because here's the hard truth. Charisma can't be forced. When a crowd feels disconnected, no amount of polished phrasing can pull them back. Attendees later described the moment in stark terms. One said, "It felt like we were watching a performance, not a conversation." Another remarked, "She talked about empowerment, but it felt like she was lecturing us. It's a fascinating contradiction. Meghan, the woman who rose to global fame by telling her own story, suddenly incapable of connecting with people in the same room. And as more guests slipped out, she began overcompensating. Her sentences stretched longer, her pitch rose slightly, her hands moved more. She was fighting to fill the void that was growing in front of her. "Each of us has the power to rewrite our story," she declared, her voice echoing slightly in the increasingly sparse hall. "No one else can define your truth." But maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't that others were defining her truth. Maybe the problem was that no one believed it anymore. By the time Meghan reached the halfway point of her speech, entire clusters of chairs were empty. You could count them, the absences forming patches of blue fabric in a sea of scattered faces. The applause after her next line was muted, almost pitying. For anyone else, this would have been a minor embarrassment. But for Meghan Markle, image was everything. And this visible loss of control, was the one thing she couldn't afford. Behind her practiced expression, a storm was brewing. Her jaw clenched, her shoulders stiffened. She scanned the room, locking eyes with the few who still sat attentively. Some nodded politely, others avoided her gaze. The people who stayed did so not out of inspiration, but out of courtesy. And courtesy isn't loyalty. It's pity wrapped in politeness. When the final few attendees left, Meghan forced a laugh mid-sentence. "Well," she said lightly, "I suppose everyone has important meetings to run to." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but they died quickly. The humor didn't land. It sounded brittle, defensive. That's the cruel irony of public speaking. The louder you try to control a room that's slipping away, the faster it slips. Outside, in the lobby, those who'd left were already talking. Some said they'd found her inauthentic. Others complained that her tone dripped with self-praise. A few defended her. "She's trying," one attendee offered. But the consensus was clear. Something about Meghan's energy just didn't sit right. By the time she wrapped up her closing lines, "Together, we can shape the world we deserve," the applause was polite but sparse. No standing ovation. No buzz of excitement. Just scattered claps and the faint hum of people gathering their belongings. Then came the pause. That long, dreadful pause where Meghan expected a sea of smiles, maybe even a few people approaching the stage. Instead, the audience dispersed quickly, like guests leaving a party that ended too soon. Backstage, her team knew the optics were bad. The event photographer had already been told, "Shoot from angles that hide the empty seats." Meghan's social media manager whispered, "We'll crop. We'll tighten. We can make it look full." But optics can't erase energy. Because while her PR team scrambled, the real damage was already done, in whispers, tweets, and quiet text messages from attendees to journalists. The words awkward, cold, and cringe appeared repeatedly. What no one could have predicted, though, was how quickly those whispers would explode online. Within hours, clips would begin circulating, carefully edited at first, then raw footage. Hashtags would trend, headlines would bite. But before the internet caught wind, something else happened, something far more personal. A VIP attendee, someone whose name carried real weight, had walked out early, not as part of the general exodus, but in a deliberate act that everyone noticed. And this time, it wasn't just bad optics. It was personal, because the person who led that walkout wasn't just a powerful business figure. She was someone Meghan had wanted, desperately, to impress. Someone whose approval could have reignited her credibility among elite circles. And when that woman's empty seat was caught on camera, Meghan's entire speech, her entire message, began to crumble under the weight of what it symbolized. Who was she? Why did she leave? And what did she say afterward that left Meghan's team in full-blown panic? What happened next would turn a bad night into a disaster. It wasn't just anyone who left that night. It was her. The one person Meghan had hoped would stay. The one presence she wanted validation from. A woman whose opinion could open or close the doors of elite America in an instant. When Alison Chantal, Fortune's editor-in-chief and chief content officer, quietly rose from her seat midway through Meghan's speech, the air in the room changed. No announcement, no dramatic scene, just a calm, decisive exit. But in the world of optics and power, that single movement spoke louder than 1,000 headlines. Let's be clear, Alison wasn't just another executive. She was the host, the gatekeeper of the very stage Meghan stood on. This was her event, her brand, her audience. For her to walk out wasn't just symbolic, it was surgical. A statement of disapproval disguised as a graceful departure. People noticed. The front row shifted in their seats. Cameras caught the moment, not overtly, but in the corner of a frame. Meghan's eyes flicked toward the movement for just a fraction of a second, enough to register what happened. And if you replay the footage, that's where you see it, the crack. A brief hesitation. A faint twitch in her jaw. Alison Chantal leaving mid-speech wasn't about timing. It was about tone. About principle. Because behind the polished smiles and corporate diplomacy, tensions had been simmering for days between Meghan's team and the Fortune organizers. Before the event, Meghan's camp had allegedly demanded that she be introduced as Duchess of Sussex. Fortune's staff politely declined. Their policy was clear. Titles were omitted at this conference to promote equality among speakers. Meghan's team pushed back. Hard. Emails flew back and forth. One insider later said, it was exhausting. Her staff wanted every word approved, every angle controlled. In the end, Fortune held firm. On stage, Meghan was introduced simply as Meghan Markle. No royal title. No grandeur. Just her name. And that decision, some believe, was the first crack in the evening's fragile foundation. According to multiple witnesses, the tension between Meghan and Alison was palpable backstage before the event. Meghan's team reportedly requested that Alison address her as Your Royal Highness off-camera. Alison refused, politely but firmly. That exchange, small as it seemed, left its mark. So when Alison rose from her seat that night, it wasn't a random act. It was quiet authority, a subtle message that she didn't need to play along. The moment she left, others followed. Attendees whispered to each other, unsure what had triggered it. But in rooms like that, power is contagious. One person's decision becomes everyone's signal. Meghan saw it. She knew exactly what it meant. And for someone who had built her image on influence, being publicly rejected by one of the most influential women in media was a nightmare. Her tone changed after that. Viewers later described how Meghan's delivery became sharper, her sentences rushed. She doubled down on emotional points, almost pleading for connection. I know what it feels like to be unheard, she said. I know what it's like when your story is dismissed. But the irony hung heavy, because right in that moment, her story was being dismissed. Not by tabloids, not by critics, but by her peers. What Alison did next only made things worse. After leaving, she didn't return. She didn't tweet about the speech. She didn't mention Meghan in her post-event roundup. For someone in Alison's position, silence is commentary. The omission was deafening. The next morning, Fortune's official social media accounts posted photos from the summit. Powerful women, insightful discussions, warm smiles. But Meghan's image was buried deep in the carousel, almost invisible. A single photo. No tag. No quote. Just a blur in the background of others. Her team noticed immediately. Panic set in. Why didn't they feature her? One aide reportedly asked. She was supposed to be a highlight. Because in Meghan's world, visibility isn't just validation, it's survival. The narrative control she prized had slipped. She wasn't being celebrated. She was being quietly erased. Let's pause here and ask, why did Alison's actions sting so deeply? Because Meghan had built her empire on female alliances, on the idea that powerful women support each other. So when one of those women, especially one who held a stage like Fortune's, essentially said, no thanks, it shattered the illusion. It wasn't the audience's indifference that hurt most. It was the rejection from within the very circle she'd tried to join. Behind closed doors, Meghan's fury was volcanic. According to one insider, she stormed off stage and demanded to know, why would she do that? Her tone, once measured and royal, turned sharp, almost unrecognizable. Staff members tried to calm her, suggesting maybe Alison had an urgent call, maybe she wasn't feeling well. But Meghan wasn't convinced. She did it on purpose, she reportedly said. She wanted to humiliate me. And deep down, maybe she was right, not out of malice, but out of quiet rebellion. Because for years, Meghan had controlled her environments, from Oprah's lighting to Spotify's editing. But in Alison's domain, she was just another speaker. No special treatment, no royal pedestal. And that, perhaps, was the one thing Meghan couldn't handle. That night, as guests mingled at the post-event dinner, Allison was seen laughing with other executives, relaxed, unbothered. Meghan was nowhere to be found. Her table sat half empty, her team huddled in corners, whispering strategy. A photographer later revealed that Meghan's staff requested certain images be deleted, particularly those showing the empty rows during her speech. The request was denied. The next morning, things got worse. Journalists who attended began sharing private impressions with their editors. Words like awkward, icy, and over-rehearsed popped up in early drafts. One media outlet even ran an anonymous quote. She came to inspire, but ended up alienating the very audience she wanted to impress. By the time Meghan woke up, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Clips were circulating. Tweets speculated about tension between her and Fortune's leadership. And though her team tried to drown the noise with carefully worded posts about empowerment and dialogue, the damage was done. The moment that single VIP stood up, the narrative flipped. Meghan wasn't the powerful speaker anymore. She was the woman who lost the room. And worse, she knew the cameras had caught it. The walkout wasn't just a PR problem. It was a humiliation. A public unraveling of her carefully curated persona. The global duchess turned misunderstood visionary. Now, she faced a dilemma. Fight back and risk looking defensive, or stay silent and let the headlines tell the story for her. But Meghan Markle doesn't do silence. And in the hours that followed, the backstage storm she unleashed would make the walkout look tame. Because what happened once the doors closed, once the applause died and the cameras stopped rolling, revealed a side of Meghan few have seen, and even fewer dared to talk about. The calm exterior cracked. The royal composure vanished. And the woman who once charmed the world let her fury show. What did she say? Who did she blame? And why did that confrontation lead to one of the most talked about leaks in her entire post-royal career? What came next would turn a public embarrassment into a viral catastrophe. When the applause died down and the cameras stopped rolling, Meghan Markle vanished behind the velvet curtain, her smile dropping faster than a stage light after closing night. On stage, she had been composed, almost robotic in her poise. But behind the scenes, it was another story entirely. The air backstage was thick with tension. Her aides rushed to her side, voices trembling with forced cheer. "You were incredible," one insisted. "They loved it," another whispered. The energy in the room was so strong. Meghan didn't buy a word of it. Her jaw was tight, her breathing sharp, her eyes darting toward the monitors still replaying her speech. On the screens, the footage didn't lie. Those empty seats glared back like silent critics. She could see the slow exodus, the flicker of shifting faces, the hollow applause. She turned away abruptly. Why were people leaving? She demanded. Her tone was steady at first, almost icy, the kind that made everyone around her freeze. No one answered immediately. The silence said everything. Was there an issue with the seating? She pressed. With the lighting? With the audio? Her assistant hesitated. No, ma'am, it wasn't that. People. What? She snapped. People what? They started leaving after the first section. For a moment, the room felt like it had no air. Meghan's face hardened. She paced, her heels striking the floor in sharp rhythm. That's impossible. My speech was solid. We rehearsed it perfectly. That was exactly the problem. Perfectly. One of her media consultants, a seasoned PR strategist who'd worked with high-profile figures before, tried to interject. Meghan, maybe it wasn't the message. It might have been the timing. The panel before yours ran long. She cut him off. No, don't sugarcoat this. Someone wanted that to happen. Her tone shifted from frustration to paranoia. Was this Fortune's doing? Did they set me up? You could feel the fear behind her anger, not just about the walkouts, but about what it represented. The loss of control, the loss of narrative. An intern quietly exited the room, phone in hand. Outside, murmurs were already spreading. People who had been near the door during her speech were whispering that Meghan had lost the audience. Someone mentioned seeing Alison Chantal walk out. Another said, she looked furious. Inside, Meghan's voice rose. Where's Alison? Get her. I want to talk to her now. Her chief of staff stepped in gently. Alison already left the venue. Meghan froze. She left? Before even thanking me. Yes, ma'am. The silence that followed was brutal. Meghan turned her back, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up a glass of water. Of course she did, she muttered under her breath. Of course. Then, Like a performer slipping into another character, she straightened up, composed her tone, and said, "Fine. We'll control the story." Her PR director nodded quickly. "We'll release official photos, tight angles, no empty seats. We'll highlight the applause at the start. I'll get a statement drafted immediately." Meghan's voice sharpened. "Make sure they mention the crowd's enthusiasm. Use that word." She turned to another aide. "And contact Getty. I want approval rights over any published shots. I don't want another repeat of the Netflix thing." The team scrambled. Phones buzzed. Laptops opened. Emails flew. But behind all the motion, one truth hung in the air. Meghan wasn't angry because the audience left. She was angry because she couldn't understand why. For someone who spent years mastering optics, this kind of unpredictability was unthinkable. An eyewitness later said, "It wasn't just frustration. It was panic disguised as anger. She's used to being adored. When that doesn't happen, she doesn't know how to respond." Another described how she paced near the mirror, muttering to herself, "They came to see me. They should have stayed." Her voice broke slightly on that last word, stayed. In the middle of the chaos, one of her younger assistants made the mistake of showing her a tweet. It was already going viral, a 15-second clip of her speech with the caption, "Half the room just left." Yikes. Meghan's expression froze. Her eyes darkened. "Where did that come from?" she asked. "We don't know yet," the assistant said. "It might have been someone in the audience." "Find out," Meghan said coldly. Now, it wasn't just about a video. It was about betrayal. Someone inside that room had filmed what was supposed to be her triumphant comeback and turned it into a humiliation. Her media advisor tried to calm her. "We can spin this. People leave panels all the time. We'll frame it as selective editing." But Meghan wasn't listening anymore. She'd already switched into crisis mode. "I want all our allies tweeting positive reactions within the hour. Call the Archwell team. Get someone to release a clip of me talking about resilience. Make it trending before noon." Her voice carried the same intensity she once used to navigate royal press wars, a mix of desperation and command. And then, in a quieter tone, she added, "Make sure no one, and I mean no one, mentions Alison Chantal." That name had become radioactive. Meanwhile, Fortune staffers were whispering in the corridor. One journalist overheard a producer say, "I think she's losing it." Another replied, "You could see it in her eyes backstage." She was furious. By now, her team had begun deleting old drafts, rewording captions, rewriting statements. The goal was simple: erase the optics of failure before they metastasized. But the problem was, it was too late. Attendees had already texted friends in the media. One even messaged a Vanity Fair contact, "I don't think Fortune will invite her again." Another text read, "She lost the room completely." It was painful to watch. And within hours, those same journalists started digging. Calls were made. Tweets multiplied. Hashtags began to bubble. Empty seats. Duchess no more. Fortune flop. Meghan's meltdown wasn't confined to the backstage area anymore. It was spilling into the digital world, pixel by pixel, post by post. She sat down finally, slumping slightly in her chair, the exhaustion visible beneath the fury. Her stylist approached to retouch her makeup before the press dinner. Meghan waved her away. "No more cameras tonight." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Not like this." The room fell silent. No one dared respond. Because for the first time, the woman who built her image on confidence looked defeated. But as the night dragged on, her anger began to harden again, transforming into something colder, sharper, more strategic. "If they want a story," she said, "I'll give them one." That was the moment her team realized. The damage control phase had begun. But what none of them knew yet was that someone else, someone close, had already started leaking details of what happened backstage. A phone recording, a text exchange, maybe even a quote. And when that leak hit the internet, it wouldn't just expose the walkout. It would expose Meghan's fury, word for word. The summit fiasco was about to turn into a full-scale scandal. Because the leak wasn't just from an audience member. It came from inside her own circle. It began with a whisper, a few cryptic posts, some blurry screenshots, and a handful of anonymous eyewitness tweets. Then, before anyone could contain it, the Fortune Summit incident erupted across the internet like wildfire. #EmptySeats was the hashtag that started it all. One attendee, sitting near the back, posted a 20-second clip showing rows of half-vacant chairs as Meghan Markle continued her speech, voice strained, smile fixed. The caption was simple, not what she expected. Within minutes, it was retweeted thousands of times. Within an hour, it was everywhere. At first, Meghan's team didn't panic. Viral moments came and went all the time, they reasoned. A few quick PR maneuvers could drown this out. A statement here, a supportive post there. But this was different. This wasn't an isolated clip. It was a pattern. Other videos began surfacing, from different angles, different attendees. One showed a woman in the front row whispering something to her colleague before both stood up and left. Another, more damning, captured Meghan's awkward laugh after noticing the departures, her voice tightening as she tried to joke about it. The captions grew crueler by the hour. She lost them halfway through. Even the Fortune crowd walked out. Duchess of Delusion. And as if that weren't bad enough, someone who had been backstage, leaked a recording. It wasn't a long clip, maybe 15 seconds, muffled and grainy, but unmistakable. Meghan's voice, sharp and angry, could be heard saying, "They walked out on me? Are you kidding?" The audio ended abruptly, but it was enough. The damage was catastrophic. The media seized on it instantly. Online tabloids, gossip sites, even mainstream outlets like the Daily Mail and Page 6 ran variations of the same headline. Caught on tape, Meghan Markle meltdown after Fortune's speech backfires. It was the perfect storm. Humiliation caught in real time, followed by confirmation of the fury that followed. For hours, Archwell's crisis team worked frantically from California. Phones buzzed. Emails flooded in. Get it taken down, one aide demanded. Flag the videos, report the posts, threaten copyright. But it was too late. Once the internet bites, it doesn't let go. By the next morning, #empty seats had trended in over 10 countries. Influencers were reacting to the clip, podcasters were dissecting it, and royal commentators were gleefully connecting it to past diva accusations. One headline read, "Meghan preaches empowerment, loses empowered women mid-speech." The irony was too good for the press to resist. And then came the bigger bombshell. Fortune itself refused to comment. When reporters asked whether Meghan's team had complained about the walkouts, the company's PR department simply replied, "We have no comment at this time." That silence was as loud as any statement. Behind the scenes, Meghan's reaction was reportedly explosive. One insider described her as furious and heartbroken, alternating between anger and disbelief. She couldn't understand how something so small could spiral into something this big, the source said. She kept saying, "They're trying to destroy me again." The problem was, this time, the criticism didn't come from tabloids or royal watchers. It came from the same elite circles Meghan had been trying to impress. Female executives who once championed her now went quiet. Partners distanced themselves. Sponsors hesitated to associate with the chaos. And yet, not everyone saw it as a total disaster. Some of Meghan's closest advisors saw opportunity amid the wreckage. "This is your moment to own the narrative," one consultant told her. "We spin this as resilience. You don't run from it, you rise from it. We craft a post, something raw and heartfelt. Acknowledgement, not apology." It sounded good on paper. But Meghan didn't want acknowledgement. She wanted control. She wanted names. Who leaked that recording? She demanded again and again. Her suspicion fell on everyone, assistants, Fortune staff, even members of her own PR team. "Someone betrayed me," she said, pacing her living room in Montecito. "And they're going to regret it." Meanwhile, social media didn't slow down. Memes started circulating. Images of empty theaters captioned, "Meghan's empowerment tour," gifs of crickets chirping over her face mid-speech. Even late-night talk shows joined in. One comedian joked, "Even Meghan's teleprompter walked out." But amid the mockery, a few voices defended her. Sympathetic bloggers framed the backlash as misogyny in disguise. "A powerful woman gets emotional, and suddenly it's a meltdown," one wrote. "Male speakers get applauded for passion, women get labeled hysterical." That narrative gained some traction, but not enough to drown out the laughter. Because what truly stung wasn't the memes, it was the silence from those who had once stood by her. Oprah, Serena Williams, Amal Clooney, none of them said a word. Then, something unexpected happened. A new clip appeared, longer, clearer, and even more damning. This time, it wasn't just audio. It was video. It showed Meghan backstage, moments after leaving the stage, gesturing wildly as her aides surrounded her. "That was sabotage," she said in a raised voice. "They made me look like a fool." She turned sharply towards someone off camera, her tone venomous. "If Allison thinks she can humiliate me, she's wrong. She's nothing without women like me." The clip cut off there, but that was enough. The leak confirmed every whisper, every headline. The meltdown wasn't gossip anymore, it was evidence. In less than 24 hours, Meghan's PR strategy shifted from defense to survival. Calls were made to media partners, influencers, even friendly journalists. Some complied, softening headlines. Others refused. The damage had already gone viral. And the cruelest twist? The person who leaked the footage wasn't an outsider. It wasn't a journalist, or a rival, or even a Fortune staffer. It was someone within Meghan's own circle. According to insiders, the recording had been taken on a phone by a staff member, someone present that night, someone trusted. They'd shared it privately with a friend, who shared it with another, and eventually, it ended up in the hands of a reporter. The betrayal cut deeper than the humiliation, because this wasn't just about reputation anymore. It was about loyalty. For Meghan, trust had always been fragile. But now, it was shattered completely. "No one's loyal," she reportedly told her team the next morning. "They all want something." And yet, the irony was brutal, because that same narrative of being victimized and betrayed was exactly what the public was tired of hearing. The woman who once captivated millions with her authenticity was now being mocked for her manipulation. And the woman who preached empowerment was being exposed as someone consumed by control. Still, Meghan wasn't ready to surrender. She never is. Because in her world, every scandal can become a comeback, if you spin it fast enough. The next step? A carefully calculated appearance. A new photo shoot, a fresh interview, maybe even a subtle jab at her critics disguised as self-reflection. But before she could rebuild, another blow was coming. Because one of the women who attended the summit, one of the very people who walked out, was about to speak out publicly. And what she said would destroy the last thread of Meghan's credibility at Fortune's most powerful women's summit. The backlash was about to get personal. There are moments in public life when silence is louder than any statement. For Meghan Markle, that silence came from the very woman who had the power to make or break the narrative, Alison Chantal, Fortune's editor-in-chief. When the dust from the Fortune summit began to settle, everyone waited for Alison to speak. The media wanted clarification. Meghan's team wanted control. Attendees wanted context. But Alison said nothing. No denial. No defense. No sympathy. And that silence, that poised, deliberate nothingness, spoke volumes. Behind the scenes, insiders knew it wasn't accidental. Alison Chantal was known for her precision, her ability to navigate corporate politics without ever breaking composure. She didn't need to clap back or call out. All she had to do was withhold a seat, a title, a quote, a tag, and the message would land. The fallout from the summit had become impossible to ignore. Major outlets were running headlines like, "Did Meghan Markle alienate Fortune's power women?" "Fortune's summit turns awkward as audience walks out on Duchess." "Silence from Fortune leadership raises eyebrows after Markle meltdown." Each article built the same picture, a room that turned cold, a host who distanced herself, and a guest who refused to admit defeat. But while the press feasted, Alison moved quietly. She didn't correct the story, but she didn't amplify it either. What she did do was curate the optics. Fortune's official Instagram posted a highlight reel the following day. It featured clips from the summit, inspiring soundbites from CEOs, candid shots of panels, smiling faces of women networking. Meghan appeared once, for half a second, at the edge of a frame, blurred in the background while another speaker took center stage. It wasn't an oversight. It was editing with intent. Observers caught it instantly. One comment under the post read, "Is it just me, or did they erase Meghan?" Another replied, "That's what happens when the crowd walks out." Meghan's team noticed too. They reached out to Fortune's PR department, politely requesting that Meghan's full segment be included in the recap video. They were told, "We'll consider future updates." Translation? No. Inside the Archwell offices, that edit sparked fury. Meghan reportedly slammed her phone down after watching the reel. "They're punishing me," she said. "They're trying to erase me." Her staff scrambled for answers. Maybe it was a mistake, one aide offered. Meghan glared. There are no mistakes like that. She wasn't wrong. Because in the digital age, omission is the new insult. Meanwhile, Allison was busy doing what she does best, playing the long game. She gave interviews about the summit's success, praising the incredible women who inspired change that weekend. But when asked specifically about Meghan Markle's appearance, she redirected smoothly. "Oh, we had many strong voices this year," she said with a polite smile. The conversations were thought-provoking. That was it. No name, no praise, no acknowledgement. Just enough detachment to let the narrative breathe and burn. Media analysts caught the nuance immediately. That's executive distancing, one PR strategist explained. She's saying everything by saying nothing. The irony? Meghan had built her image around being the woman who speaks. Yet now, her biggest opponent was a woman who didn't have to. For weeks after the event, Allison's subtle shade continued to ripple through elite circles. Invitations slowed. Emails went unanswered. High-profile allies stopped tagging Meghan in their posts. It wasn't public shaming. It was professional ghosting. And in that world, ghosting is death. Even Fortune's own recap newsletter omitted Meghan's quotes entirely. The email listed every major speaker, CEOs, founders, philanthropists, except her. To outsiders, it seemed like a small slight. But to insiders, it was the equivalent of being quietly excommunicated. Meghan's slot had gone from featured keynote to footnote. The most devastating blow came a week later. Allison shared a LinkedIn post reflecting on the summit. It read, "Authenticity always resonates. It's not about performance. It's about presence. No names, no direct references, but everyone knew who she meant." The comments were filled with subtle jabs. Exactly. Authenticity can't be staged. Well said, Allison. Totally agree. The best speakers connect, not perform. And right beneath it, one user added, "Maybe Meghan should read this." That comment went viral. Screenshots spread across X, Instagram, Reddit. Within hours, Allison's post had become a referendum on Meghan's authenticity. Podcasts debated it. Journalists quoted it. Even TikTok creators turned it into reaction content. Suddenly, Allison Chantal, calm, diplomatic Allison, had become an unexpected anti-Meghan icon. And the cruelest part? She hadn't said a single negative word. For Meghan, this was worse than criticism. Criticism she could fight. Silence she couldn't. It cornered her, forced her into invisibility. Reports from Montecito described her frustration boiling over. "She's furious that Allison isn't responding," said one source. "She feels ignored, and for Meghan, being ignored is worse than being attacked." She tried to fight back indirectly, through allies, through carefully worded statements about media misrepresentation. But it didn't stick, because Allison's strategy was simple. Don't engage, don't explain, don't give her more oxygen. And that strategy worked perfectly. The public perception crystallized. Meghan Markle had embarrassed herself at a prestigious event, and Fortune had gracefully moved on, without her. But behind closed doors, Meghan wasn't just hurt. She was planning. According to those close to her, she began drafting ideas for a comeback interview, one where she could reclaim her voice, frame the summit disaster as a learning experience, maybe even play the empathy card. "People want vulnerability," she told her PR team. "They want to see that I'm human." But before that comeback could take shape, something else happened. A journalist who attended the summit, someone who had been near the front, someone who had seen everything, decided to break their silence. And when their insider account hit the press, it didn't just confirm the rumors. It painted an even darker picture of what happened that night. Because according to this insider, the empty seats weren't the worst part. It was what Meghan said after the cameras stopped that stunned everyone the most. It was the moment that finally cracked him. The moment Prince Harry, the cheeky, loyal, fiercely protective son, realized that everything he believed about love, family, and loyalty was slipping through his fingers. He had watched his wife cry under the harsh glare of the tabloids. He had watched the monarchy, the institution that raised him, treat her with suspicion and silence. He had defended her, fought for her, even abandoned his own home for her. But now, as King Charles's words echoed across the world, "There's something the public never knew." Harry's world came crashing down. Because for the first time, it wasn't the press attacking Meghan. It was his father. And worse, he was defending the memory of the one person Harry loved more than anyone else, the Queen. He couldn't process it. He couldn't breathe. Those who were close to him at the time said he stopped answering calls for 2 days. Meghan tried to console him, but every time she spoke, he grew quieter. Every word from her felt heavier now, loaded with doubt. Because somewhere deep down, Harry began to wonder, what if there was truth in his father's words? What if the Queen really had been hurt? He replayed every memory he had of her, her laughter, her wisdom, her patience, the way she had always welcomed him into her arms, even when he messed up. And now, to think that in her final days, she had been in pain, emotional pain, because of something connected to him, it tore him apart. One friend said it was the first time they'd ever seen Harry truly still. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He just stared out the window, whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know." Because if King Charles's account was accurate, if Meghan had disrespected the Queen in that final conversation, then Harry wasn't just the estranged son. He was the cause of his grandmother's heartbreak. And that realization changed everything. You have to understand, Harry's relationship with his grandmother was sacred. She wasn't just the Queen to him. She was his anchor, the one constant through every storm. When his parents' marriage collapsed, she gave him stability. When he lost Diana, she gave him guidance. When he married Meghan, she gave him approval, or so he thought. But now, the illusion was gone. And what hurt the most was the silence. When Charles made his revelation, he didn't call Harry beforehand. There was no warning, no private explanation. Harry learned about it like everyone else. On television, through headlines, through whispers. Charles breaks silence on Meghan. The headlines screamed. The Queen was hurt before her death. And suddenly, Harry wasn't just a prince anymore. He was a man caught between two women, one gone, one alive, both of whom defined him in different ways. He sat there that night, scrolling through clips of his father's statement, over and over again, rewinding the moment Charles's voice cracked, pausing when he said, "She felt disrespected." He turned to Meghan and asked, quietly, "What did you say to her?" Those 6 words changed everything. Because Meghan didn't answer immediately. She hesitated, looked away, said, "I told her the truth." But Harry pressed. "What truth?" Meghan's tone hardened. "The truth about how they treated me. How they treated us. About the lies. About the coldness." Harry's voice rose. "But did you raise your voice at her?" She blinked. "I was emotional." "Did you disrespect her?" he asked. And then came the silence. A silence that said everything. The kind of silence that makes a man question everything he thought he knew. For the first time, Harry didn't know how to defend her. He wanted to believe her. He always had. But now, the image of his grandmother crying, his father's trembling voice, his mother's memory, his own shame, it all collided inside him like a tidal wave. And he broke. Reports later claimed that Harry left the house that night. Just walked out. No phone. No coat. Just disappeared into the California night, driving aimlessly until he found himself parked near the ocean. He sat there for hours, watching the waves crash against the shore, tears streaming down his face. One source close to him said he whispered over and over, "I didn't want this. I never wanted this." It wasn't anger anymore. It was grief. Grief for the family he lost. Grief for the grandmother whose love he might have misunderstood. Grief for the marriage that suddenly felt heavy with guilt. Because somewhere inside, Harry began to see what his father had been trying to do. Not attack Meghan, but defend the Queen. And that broke him even more. You can see the change in him in every photograph after that. The light in his eyes dimmed. The smile became tighter. The confidence turned to uncertainty. Friends said he grew distant, not from Meghan, but from himself. He started questioning everything, one insider revealed. Every memory, every conversation. He wanted to know what really happened in that room, the one with Meghan and the Queen. But he could never know. The only 2 women who could tell the truth. One was gone, and the other wasn't saying a word. So Harry became trapped in limbo, torn between love and truth. And that's when he began reaching out privately to old allies inside the palace. People who might have overheard things, seen things, remembered the tension after that infamous meeting. He needed answers. What he heard shattered him all over again. One aide reportedly told him, "I don't know what she said, sir. But Her Majesty cried afterward." That was enough. That single sentence, "Her Majesty cried afterward," burned into his mind. Because Harry had spent his entire life watching the Queen hold the world together with composure and calm. The idea that he had somehow contributed to making her cry was unbearable. From that moment on, Harry's entire posture toward the royal family shifted. He stopped lashing out publicly, stopped doing interviews about his truth. Instead, he went quiet, withdrawn, controlled. The man who once vowed never to return to the royal fold suddenly began asking aides about the logistics of reconciliation. Could he speak to his father privately? Could they meet somewhere away from cameras? Could they talk, just as family? But Charles wasn't ready. Not yet. Because while Harry was breaking down, Charles was building up the courage to release what would become the most devastating piece of all, the Queen's second letter. The one she wrote to him. The one marked, "For my son, read when the time is right." And when Charles opened it, everything he thought he knew about Meghan, about the Queen, about Harry, changed forever. But before that revelation came to light, something else happened. A private exchange that would make Harry question his own place in the royal family entirely.